I'm in the ancient Agora, an archaeology site in the center of Athens in Greece, where people used to live 2,500 years ago. So I'm on a bit of a travel, so why not talk about camera settings for travel photography? Because it's so easy. Well, at least I made it easy for me. Let's jump right into it. I shoot 96% of my photos in Aperture Priority. That's A or AV on your camera, which means that the aperture is the only thing you really have to adjust. And the shutter speed and the ISO will be automatic according to the aperture, how much light that comes into the camera. But I set the maximum ISO to 8,000, so I don't allow the camera to go over 8,000 in ISO. And I set the minimum shutter speed to 1/125th of a second, which means I don't allow it to go below that. But it will go below that if the ISO raises to 8,000 and still needs more light. So for example, if I have enough light, the ISO will stay at 100, and the shutter speed will be faster to compensate for the amount of light that comes into the camera. When it gets darker and the shutter speed goes down to 1/125th of a second, and the camera still thinks it needs more light, then the ISO will start to raise. And when that has raised to 8,000, then the shutter speed will get lower and slower. So the only thing I really change is the aperture. I will take a couple of pictures of the statues there. I will zoom in to 50 on my lens. I will take one picture with the widest aperture I can and one with the narrowest aperture I can and see what's the difference in shutter speed and ISO. So I will come back to you. Now I have an aperture of 3.5 and the shutter speed is 1/320, ISO 100. And if I change it to the narrowest aperture I can, f20, now the shutter speed is at 1/125 and the ISO is 1250. I normally go with either the widest aperture I can. This is a variable aperture lens, so I have 2.8 at 28 millimeters and 5.6 at 200 millimeters. So either the widest aperture I can or f11. That's it. That's the only settings I change. Sometimes though, I also change the exposure compensation. If there are very bright highlights, I might compensate down a little bit. But that's the only thing I change. I leave the rest to the camera, which is automatic. Why? Because then I'm fast. I can concentrate on the composition, the framing, the timing. I don't have to concentrate on the camera settings. And I've set my custom aperture settings to memory 1 on my camera, which means that if I have messed up some settings in manual or aperture priority mode and I need to work fast, I can always just click on the one and I'm back to my aperture custom setting. But there are a couple of other settings I use also. If I'm on a tripod, I go to manual. Then I set the ISO as low as I can. I set the aperture according to what I'm gonna photograph and then adjust the light with the shutter speed. And sometimes also compensate the light by raising the ISO a little bit if the shutter speed gets hilariously long. But there's one more setting I use frequently, and that is bracketing. I take 3 shots and then I combine them in Lightroom, Photoshop, or both. And I get 3 different exposures, 3 different exposure times. Because even though I'm in aperture priority, I don't change the aperture. The only thing that changes is the shutter speed. So I set the ISO to 100, the aperture to f11, and when I then take the picture, the camera will determine how much light it gets and adjust the shutter speed according to that. It takes one photo at normal exposure, 1 2 stops down, and 1 2 stops over. Okay, so here's a shot that I might want to bracket. So I'm gonna take out my camera, put it on my platypod. I have my memory 2 set to bracketing with a 2-second timer. So memory 2, I have ISO 100, f11, and now it looks like the first exposure is gonna be 1/8 of a second. Let's see here. Place it, level it, hit the focus, and press the shutter. And it took 3 pictures. 3 pictures that I then will combine in Lightroom and or Photoshop. So there you have it. It's quite easy. And I think it's more important to concentrate on framing, composition, subject than it is to concentrate on the camera settings. And most modern cameras have extremely good metering. They know what to do. The automatic settings on modern cameras are really, really good. So why don't take advantage of that and concentrate on what like I just said, framing, composition, subject. If I can do both, that's excellent. But normally you have to work faster than that. Thanks for watching.